Although the oceans cover 2/3 of the Earth's surface, it is stated in a remarkable report of the National Academy of Sciences that we know less about many of the regions of the ocean today than we know about the surface of the moon. A committee of the National Academy believes that the problems to be solved about the oceans are as important as those of space. We need to know what controls the number of fish in different regions, the quantity of plant and animal life on which they feed, and how these quantities could be increased. They believe that we must learn these things if we are to help solve the problem of providing food for the growing numbers of underfed people in the world. The military aspect is also important. If a satisfactory international submarine control system is ever to be agreed upon, we must, the committee insists, be able to make the ocean depths visible to man so all submarines in the oceans can be tracked. Ocean research can also add to our knowledge of climate conditions. It is believed that changes in the storage of gases and heat in the oceans influence the process of climate change. In order to forecast and possibly control climate, studies must be made of these changes. It is astonishing to me that so many people presume that the gentle art of manners is based on money. Etiquette, it is widely believed, consists of forms of behavior requiring fortunes in silverware, evening clothing, and huge vehicles. Most people feel they need etiquette only on occasions when they are spending a great deal of money, arranging a wedding, for example. Otherwise, they can apparently make do with rudeness. Dear. You can imagine how upsetting I find this. I don't know which offends me more, people who seek to demonstrate their genuineness by forgetting manners or those who are scrambling to learn them to serve their social ambitions. They all end up rude. The truth is that there is very little relationship between manners and money. Certainly, I have never noticed that the rich are more polite than others. The culture of civilized nations today consists of a combination of traits that originated in peoples of all races, living in all parts of the world. Archaeological investigations have enabled us to trace the development of culture in Europe for the last 100,000 years, a development which began slowly and which proceeded at an ever-increasing tempo. Until modern times, the most important factor in this development has been the acquisition of traits from neighboring cultures by the process of diffusion. In modern times, with European civilization spreading over the greater part of the globe, the greater number of additions to our culture come from inventions which occur within the civilization itself. Would Noah really have been able to save animals from extinction by rescuing a pair of each species from the flood? In theory, that seems possible. Each couple routinely produces more offsprings than are needed to replace the father and mother in the population. A pair of cats easily produces 10 kittens a year for a decade, or 50 times what is necessary to replace themselves in the population. The only thing that prevents a species from multiplying enough to cover the face of the earth is competition for limited resources. In a world emptied of competition by the flood, each pair of animals should have been able to repopulate its species by doing what comes naturally, that is, by overproducing. But modern rescuers, zoos and wildlife groups who work to save endangered species have not had an easy time. Those who made America, not in the 17th and 18th centuries alone but down to the First World War, were for one reason or another refugees from the Old World. They had turned their backs on Europe and embraced America, and to many of them the essence of America was precisely that it was not Europe. Yet it was, of course, Europe, a Europe transplanted, a Europe transformed, a Europe perhaps translated into something different. America was the child of the whole of Europe and, in a curious fashion, of Africa, too. Her language, religion, social organization, culture, science, technology were all inherited, and however different the child was from its mother, Europe, the inheritance was plain. We have only to imagine how very different American civilization would have been had America been settled from the West, instead of the East, from China or Japan rather than from Europe and Africa. To avoid the various foolish opinions which we tend to hold, no superhuman genius is required. A few simple rules will keep you, not from all error, but from silly error. If the matter is one that can be settled by observation, make the observation yourself. Aristotle could have avoided the mistake of thinking that women have fewer teeth than men, by simply asking Mrs. Aristotle to keep her mouth open while he counted. He did not do so because he thought he knew. Thinking that you know when in fact you don't is a grave mistake, which we too often make. Many matters, however, are less easily brought to the test of experience. If you have strong convictions on many such matters, there are ways in which you can make yourself aware that you might be mistaken. If an opinion contrary to your own makes you angry, that is a sign that you are in a way aware of having no good reason for thinking as you do. So whenever you find yourself getting angry about a difference of opinion, be on your guard. You will probably find, on examination, that your belief is going beyond what the evidence says is true. Science dominates modern life. Just as the ancient Greeks consulted oracles to foretell the future, people all around the world now expect to consult scientists about enterprises they wish to undertake or problems they seek to solve. This has come about as the result of centuries of slow changes which have shown that science can explain, predict, and therefore manipulate nature. But it is in the last 200 years that such changes have become most obvious and have occurred most rapidly. These changes can justifiably be called revolutionary, since some of the discoveries were as great and fundamental as those of, say, Copernicus or Newton in earlier centuries. And science has come to be taken for granted. This is largely because of its growing impact on laymen through technology. The electric light bulb, which we take for granted, would not have been possible without the work of the American scientist Thomas Edison, nor would much of the dyeing and drugs industries without the work of the English chemist Perkin. People might not think about the link between science and technology in any very clear manner. Most of us are still pretty foggy about such things, but they steadily grew to connect such marvels as better lighting or better medicines with something called science. The Japanese educational system, rather than merely a source of learning, is seen as the primary path to social and economic success. Those who graduate into higher education later obtain entry to the big companies and government offices, the others being given minor posts and duties. Thus, in order to pass the college entrance examination, children are subjected to intensive training from a very young age and, in addition to regular schooling, they may well undergo special tutoring at home or periods in a prep schools or cram courses. What they are learning is not necessarily a rational summary of what society thinks an intelligent person should know, but rather mere memorization of old tests from the institution they hope to attend. This material is of no use to those who do not continue in school. These should have been taught a trade. I tried to visit my neighborhood zoo one afternoon but found it closed for renovations. As I turned and headed back toward home, I was thinking only of the old black rhino, wondering whether he'd be back when the zoo was reopened. Judging from my numerous visits, he was never a very big draw, being, I suppose, entirely too inactive to look at for long. He seemed obviously enough to show no interest in his environment. And yet I found him the most attractive, the most challenging to draw near to for that. Several years ago, a well-known feminist author was interviewed on British television about her new book on language and sexes, in which she argued forcefully that language is a man-made product, designed by and for the male half of the species to the neglect and exclusion of women. Her interviewers, besides the male program host, were 3 male academics, 2 of them full professors of English. I had read her book myself, and was keenly interested in what she had to say. I was to be surprised and disappointed, however, for the great majority of the words uttered in the 15-minute interview were spoken by the men. In fact, although I did not take accurate measures, I estimated at the time that the author spoke for less than her democratic share of 3 minutes, much less than one might have expected under the circumstances. This did not seem to be due to the author's unwillingness or inability to contribute to the conversation. She had after all written the book. Moreover, I knew her to be a very intelligent and articulate person. I also noticed that she was interrupted in mid-sentence at least twice, although she did not interrupt anyone herself. Finally, although she was in her 30s and had got a PhD, she was addressed by her first name by the host and other interviewers alike, and even at one point as a "my dear," unlike the others, who were always addressed by their formal academic titles.